Under the harsh fluorescence of a Saturday night supermarket single, Dad Carter Leon kneels to compare cereal prices while his 8-year-old daughter Audrey swings their basket like a game. Without warning, 2 uniformed officers close in hands on holsters, voices low and lethal. Shoppers freeze carts, squealing to a stop. Audrey's smile collapses as steel cuffs bite into her father's wrists. They accuse him of a hit and run, of fleeing the scene of leaving someone to die. Carter is stunned. He doesn't even own a car. Then, one officer's phone rings a private call he shouldn't answer. He does. And that decision ruins everything. But to understand how a single phone call could destroy careers and expose a broken system, we have to go back. Back to the small apartment where Carter Leon and his daughter lived quiet lives in the margins of a city that barely noticed them. The neighborhood sat on the tired edge of town where rent came cheap and dreams came cheaper. Cracked sidewalks ran between apartment buildings with peeling paint parking lots crowded with aging sedans that had seen better decades. The wail of distant sirens was so common that residents no longer looked up. For people here, emergency lights were just part of the soundtrack of survival. Carter Leon lived on the 3rd floor of one of those buildings. At 35, he looked older than his years. His frame was lean but wiry, the kind of build earned from manual labor and too little sleep. His clothes were always clean, but clearly second-hand jeans worn soft at the knees. T-shirts faded from countless washings. Dark circles lived permanently beneath his eyes. But when he looked at his daughter, those tired eyes softened into something warm and unbreakable. He worked the graveyard shift at a logistics warehouse, loading trucks and scanning barcodes while the rest of the city slept. It was mindless work, the kind that left his body aching and his mind numb. But it paid. Not well, but enough. Enough to keep the lights on, enough to keep Audrey fed and clothed, enough to survive. It wasn't always like this. Carter used to work in an office downtown, analyzing data for the city's accountability department. He'd been good at it too, finding patterns in complaint records, building models that revealed systemic problems in law enforcement practices. He'd felt useful then, like his work mattered, like he was making the city better. That was before everything fell apart. Before the report. Before his wife died. Before he learned that telling the truth could cost you everything. Inside their small apartment, evening light filtered through thin curtains, casting amber shadows across second-hand furniture. Carter stood at the kitchen counter, counting bills with careful precision. A list on the refrigerator tracked their expenses, rent, utilities, Audrey's school costs, groceries. The numbers were tight. They were always tight. Audrey sat at the dining table, her tablet propped against library books. At 8 years old, she had her father's thoughtful eyes, but none of his weariness. Her hair was pulled into a practical ponytail, and she wore an oversized superhero t-shirt from a thrift store. She was drawing something, her tongue poking out in concentration. She looked up suddenly. "Dad? How come we never go on vacations like the kids at school talk about?" Carter turned from his counting, forcing a smile. "Because we're saving up so you can pick the best place when you're ready. Deal?" The answer was half joke, half truth, and all evasion. The kind of thing parents say when they can't admit that beach trips exist in a world their paycheck can't reach. On the corner of the table, partially hidden under a box of crackers, lay an opened envelope. The letterhead read, "Alexandra Bridget, Civil Rights Attorney." Carter had read it 3 times and wished he hadn't read it at all. The letter invited him to serve as a witness in a lawsuit against several local police officers, including one name that made his stomach turn Henry Corbin. The letter referenced Carter's old work, the data models that had flagged Corbin's name repeatedly. Carter had folded the letter and shoved it out of sight. He didn't want to think about it. Didn't want to remember the price he'd already paid for speaking up. All he wanted now was to keep his head down, work his shifts, and raise his daughter in peace. The memories came anyway, unbidden and unwelcome. 3 years ago, Carter had worked in a bright office surrounded by computers and colleagues. His job was to analyze complaint data filed against city police. He'd built algorithms to spot patterns to flag officers whose records showed concerning trends. One afternoon, his screen had lit up with red flags. A cluster of officers showed complaint rates far above average, Allegations of searches without probable cause, reports of excessive force during routine stops targeting specific neighborhoods. At the center of it all was Officer Henry Corbin, whose name appeared again and again. Carter had compiled everything into a detailed report highlighting the patterns with charts and statistics that couldn't be argued with.
He'd believed the system would care, that someone higher up would see what he saw and take action. His supervisor had looked at the report with a tightening jaw. "You sure you want to send this up the chain?" Carter had been sure. "If we don't fix this, who's going to trust this city?" The report went up, and then Carter's career went down.
Within weeks he was reassigned to menial tasks. His colleagues stopped meeting his eyes in hallways. Invitations to meetings dried up. He became invisible, a ghost haunting the office that had once valued his work. But worse than his own isolation was what happened to his family. His wife Emily felt the pressure too. Their income dropped when Carter lost his performance bonuses. Strange cars began parking outside their apartment at odd hours. Nothing overt, nothing provable, but enough to make her anxious enough to make sleep difficult. They fought about it. She wasn't angry at him, not exactly, but she was scared. "You have to think about us," she'd said, voice breaking. "Not just about your conscience." He'd promised it would get better, that standing up for what was right would pay off eventually. 6 months later, Emily was dead. A car accident on a rainy night, her sedan hydroplaning on a slick highway. The police report called it a tragic accident, no fault assigned. But Carter couldn't stop the thoughts that haunted him. If she hadn't been so stressed, so exhausted from worry, would she have been sharper behind the wheel? If their life hadn't been upended by his whistleblowing, would she still be alive? He left the city job a month after her funeral. He took the first job he could find that didn't require questions. Logistics, night shifts, anonymous work where nobody cared who you used to be, and he swore he'd never get involved with the system again, never fight battles he couldn't win, never risk what little he had left. Which was why that letter from Alexandra Bridget sat hidden under crackers, unacknowledged and unanswered. Saturday evening arrived with mundane predictability. Carter studied the grocery list taped to the fridge, doing mental math. A discount flyer for the supermarket 6 blocks away promised sales on staples. If they were careful, he might have enough left over for Audrey to pick out 1 box of the cereal she loved. "Hey, Peanut," he called. "Want to go grocery shopping? If we're smart with the coupons, I'll let you pick out your favorite." Audrey's face lit up like Christmas. She grabbed her tablet. "I'll help you calculate everything. My tablet has a calculator app." They walked through streets, washed in orange streetlight. The air smelled of asphalt and distant cooking. Twice patrol cars cruised past, and twice Carter felt his shoulders tense before he forced them to relax. It was automatic now, that wariness around police. A reflex he couldn't quite shake. Audrey noticed. She always noticed. "You don't like those cars, do you, Dad?" He managed a weak smile. "I just don't like trouble, that's all." The supermarket glowed against the darkening sky, its parking lot half full of weekend shoppers. Inside, fluorescent lights bleached everything white and shadowless. The air was cold recycled, carrying the faint chemical smell of floor cleaner beneath the produce section's manufactured freshness. Tinny music played from overhead speakers, interrupted periodically by announcements about sales. They grabbed a cart and started down the aisles. Audrey consulted her tablet like a general planning strategy, comparing prices and calculating totals. Carter found himself relaxing into the routine. This was safe. This was normal. Just a father and daughter buying groceries, trying to make their budget stretch another week. A young woman named Bridget worked the evening shift at the register. She'd seen Carter and Audrey before, always polite, always counting out exact change with quiet dignity. Sometimes she'd quietly rescan a coupon or round down on the total. Small acts of kindness she never mentioned. Another customer, a woman in her 20s named Gwen, wandered the aisles with her phone held high, narrating to her camera about life in the city. But across the store near the front entrance, the atmosphere was different. Officer Henry Corbin stood with his partner Oliver Zane scanning the shoppers with practiced eyes. Henry Corbin was in his mid-30s with the kind of square-jawed confidence that came from years of wearing a badge. His record showed commendations for high arrest rates. What it didn't show officially were the complaints, the accusations that followed him like shadows, the pattern of stops that seemed to target certain neighborhoods, certain people. Henry believed in his work, believed that the people complaining were just guilty ones trying to escape consequences. He'd heard rumors about some Federal Review whispers about internal investigations, but he had protections. He always had. Beside him, Oliver Zane was younger, less certain. He'd joined the force with images of heroism in his head, but the reality had been murkier. He'd seen Henry go too far more than once. It bothered Oliver, but not enough to say anything, not enough to risk his career. Earlier that evening, they'd received a briefing about a hit-and-run case, a serious accident from the night before. The victim was in critical condition. The driver had fled. Evidence was sparse, just a vague description from an intoxicated witness who remembered a tired-looking man with a kid looked poor. Their supervisor, Lieutenant Clinton William, had made himself clear. "The media's all over this one. I need someone held accountable. Don't come back empty." Then came an anonymous call. A tip that a man matching the description frequented a certain supermarket, always with a young girl, always using discount coupons. Looked suspicious. No vehicle description, no license plate, no real evidence at all. When Henry spotted Carter kneeling in the cereal aisle, something clicked in his brain. Tired-looking man, kid with him, cheap clothes. He matched. "That's him," Henry said quietly to Oliver. Oliver looked uncertain. Based on what that description could fit half the single dads in this city. Henry's jaw tightened. "Trust me, I know the type." They positioned themselves strategically, Henry approaching from behind Oliver, circling to the front, standard procedure for apprehending a potentially dangerous suspect. Carter was crouched down, comparing prices on cereal boxes, while Audrey stood beside him, reading nutrition facts off her tablet. It was a moment of pure mundane normalcy. A father trying to make good choices on a tight budget. Then Henry's voice cut through the supermarket air like a blade. "Sir, step away from the girl and raise your hands where I can see them." The store seemed to freeze. Shopping carts stopped mid-aisle. Conversations died. All eyes turned toward the cereal section. Audrey looked up from her tablet, eyes wide. "Dad! What's happening?" Carter's hands rose instinctively, palms out, non-threatening. His mind raced. This had to be a mistake. Some misunderstanding. "Officer, there's been a mistake," he said carefully. "My daughter is scared." But Henry was already moving hands, reaching for handcuffs. Oliver stood to the side, looking increasingly uncomfortable, but saying nothing. Audrey's tablet slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. She ran to her father's side, small arms wrapping around his leg. "Dad didn't do anything. He didn't—" Henry grabbed Carter's wrist, twisting it behind his back with more force than necessary. Carter's body slammed against the metal shelving. Boxes of cereal tumbled to the floor, scattering across the tiles. "You're under arrest for suspicion of hit and run and fleeing the scene of a crime." Henry's voice was mechanical, rushing through words that should have been delivered with care. "I don't even own a car," Carter tried to explain. "I was at work all night. There are records. Save it for your lawyer." Around them, phones emerged from pockets. Bridget at the register pulled out her cell, hands shaking as she hit record. Gwen's phone was already filming. The steel cuffs closed around Carter's wrists with a sound that echoed in the sudden silence. Too tight, biting into skin. Audrey screamed, actually screamed, a sound of pure terror that made several shoppers flinch. "He didn't do anything. He's my dad." She clung to Carter's leg, refusing to let go. Oliver stepped forward, trying to be gentle. "Sweetie, you need to step back." Henry glanced at the crying child with cold efficiency. "We'll call child services." That was when his phone rang. Henry's personal cell. The screen showed unknown number. Standard procedure said, "Don't answer personal calls during an arrest. Focus on the situation." But Henry thought it might be additional information, so he pulled out the phone and answered. "Yeah." The voice on the other end was female, calm and razor-sharp. "Officer Corbin, this is Alexandra Bridget. I'm calling regarding the person you just handcuffed, Carter Leon." Henry's eyebrows drew together. "How do you know his name?" "Because he is a material witness in an ongoing federal civil rights review involving your unit. If you continue to detain him without probable cause—" Henry cut her off, irritation flaring.
"I don't care who you are. He matches a suspect description. I'm doing my job." Around him, people were close enough to hear. Audrey heard the words, "I don't care who you are." Gwen's phone microphone caught them too. Alexandra's voice remained steady. "This call is being recorded. If you proceed without legitimate probable cause, every second of this interaction will be part of a federal case."
"Do whatever you want,"
Henry snapped.
"I'm not releasing him."
He hung up, shoved the phone back onto his belt.
"Let's move him."
Carter was pulled toward the exit, Audrey still screaming behind him. A store security guard gently but firmly held the child back.
"It's okay, sweetie. It's okay."
But it wasn't okay. And somewhere in the back of Henry Corbin's mind, beneath the pride and the certainty, a small voice wondered if maybe he'd just made a terrible mistake. The patrol car's interior smelled of industrial plastic and old coffee. Carter sat in the back, hands cuffed behind him, the metal biting into his wrists with each bump. Through the wire mesh, he could see the backs of Henry's and Oliver's heads. Neither spoke. Carter stared out the window at familiar streets passing by. This couldn't be real. He'd been grocery shopping. Just grocery shopping. The precinct was a squat concrete building that looked exactly like what it was, a fortress designed to intimidate. Inside, the air smelled of burned coffee and floor wax. They led him to an interrogation room, small, windowless. A metal table bolted to the floor with chairs on either side. Fluorescent lighting that hummed and flickered. The temperature was deliberately cold. Henry sat across from him, a thin file folder on the table. Oliver stood near the door, arms crossed.
"Let's make this simple," Henry began. "Tell us where you were last night when the accident occurred."
Carter took a breath, forcing himself to stay calm.
"I was at work. Logistics warehouse on Industrial Boulevard. Night shift, 11 to 7. There are records, time cards, security footage. My supervisor can verify."
Henry didn't write any of this down, just stared at Carter with flat skepticism.
"I want a lawyer," Carter added. "I have the right to remain silent."
"You can get a lawyer if you want," Henry said dismissively.
"But that just makes you look guilty."
Carter wanted desperately to make them understand.
"I'll cooperate. But I'm telling you, I wasn't anywhere near a hit and run. I don't own a car. I haven't owned a car in 2 years.
Oliver shifted uncomfortably.
Something about Carter's demeanor was wrong. Or rather, it was too right. He didn't act like guilty suspects usually acted. There was no aggression, no deflection, just confusion and mounting fear.
Henry leaned back.
"You used to work for the city, right? Data analysis or something?"
Carter's jaw tightened.
"Yes."
"What happened? Couldn't handle real work."
There it was,
the edge of recognition in Henry's voice. He knew. Carter had been one of the people who'd filed reports about officer misconduct. Carter met his eyes.
"I tried to fix something that was broken. The system didn't like it."
Henry's expression hardened. So that's who this was. One of the troublemakers.
"Well," Henry said coldly, "the system's going to like this even less."
Meanwhile, in a waiting area down the hall,
Audrey sat on a plastic chair, too big for her, hugging her tablet to her chest. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. A female officer had tried to give her water and a coloring book, but Audrey refused both. She kept replaying it in her mind. The way her dad's face had looked when the handcuffs clicked shut. The way they'd pushed him. The way he'd looked back at her as they dragged him away. But Audrey remembered something her father had taught her. "If something bad happens, and you can't reach me," he'd said once, "there's one other person you can call. Enoch Flynn. If things get really bad, you call him." Audrey looked down at her tablet. The emergency contact list was still there. She looked up at the officer. "Can I make a phone call?" The officer hesitated. "Sweetie, we're trying to reach family. Please." Audrey's voice cracked. "There's someone my dad said I could call. Please." Something in the child's eyes made the officer soften. She handed over her cell phone. "Okay, but just one call." Audrey dialed. It rang 3 times. Then a man's voice answered, gruff but alert. "Hello. Is this Enoch Flynn?" Audrey's voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes. Who's this? My name is Audrey Leon. You knew my dad. Carter Leon. They took him. The police took him and he didn't do anything. They said hit and run, but my dad doesn't even have a car. The words tumbled out before dissolving into sobs. There was a long pause. Then Enoch's voice came back sharp and focused. Audrey, where are you right now? Enoch Flynn sat in his home office surrounded by case files. He was a federal investigator specializing in civil rights violations, a man who'd spent 20 years building cases against corrupt officials. And he owed Carter Leon more than most people knew. 3 years ago, when Enoch had been falsely accused of mishandling evidence, it was Carter's data analysis that had proven his innocence. That analysis had saved Enoch's career and probably his freedom. Now Carter was in trouble. Real trouble. Enoch immediately pulled up his database, typing in Henry Corbin's name. The search results made his blood run cold. Multiple complaints, pending federal review. Subject of the lawsuit Alexandra Bridget was building. This wasn't just a bad arrest. This was retaliation. He grabbed his phone and dialed Alexandra's direct line. It's Enoch. We have a situation. They've got Carter Leon. What? Alexandra's voice shifted from casual to laser-focused. Where? Local precinct. Arrested him in front of his kid. Claims he's a hit-and-run suspect. Corbin, how did you know? Because I sent Carter a letter asking him to testify in our case. This is retaliation. She was already dialing another number. When the precinct's main line answered, she identified herself calmly but firmly. This is Alexandra Bridget, civil rights attorney. I need to speak with Lieutenant Clinton William immediately regarding an arrest that occurred approximately 1 hour ago. Carter Leon. When Clinton came on the line, Alexandra didn't waste time. Lieutenant, one of your officers just arrested a material federal witness without probable cause. I notified the arresting officer during the detention that Mr. Leon is part of an active civil rights review. He dismissed my warning and proceeded anyway. The entire interaction is recorded. Clinton's stomach dropped. Recorded. The phone call between myself and Officer Corbin, plus multiple civilian videos from the supermarket. If this proceeds, it will be entered as evidence in federal court. Clinton's hand tightened on the phone. I'll look into it. You'll do more than look into it, Lieutenant. You'll review the arrest report and verify the probable cause. Because if this turns into what I think it is, your entire department is going to be under federal monitoring. After Alexandra hung up, Clinton sat at his desk for a long moment. Then he called Oliver Zane into his office. Tell me exactly what happened tonight, Clinton said. Start from the beginning. Oliver did. And as he talked, he heard how thin it all sounded. An anonymous tip, a vague description. No vehicle information, no forensics, no actual evidence linking Carter to the hit and run. Did you verify any of this before making the arrest? Clinton asked. Oliver looked at the floor. Henry said he matched the description. Half the single fathers in this city matched that description. Clinton pulled up the hit-and-run file on his computer. He read through it once, then again. The witness statement mentioned the driver was alone, no child. The vehicle was described as a dark sedan, possibly a Honda. Carter didn't own a car at all. Clinton looked up. This doesn't match. None of it matches. I know, sir. I tried to tell Henry, but what? Oliver took a breath. But I was afraid to push back harder. I thought maybe he knew something I didn't. Clinton closed his eyes. This was the culture he'd allowed to fester. Junior officers too scared to question senior officers. Senior officers too arrogant to admit mistakes. While internal damage control was beginning at the precinct, external damage was spreading faster than anyone could contain. The videos from the supermarket were circulating. Bridget's footage showed the arrest from one angle. Gwen's captured another, including the audio of Henry saying, "I don't care who you are." Enoch sent an official request to the precinct to preserve all body cam footage, all surveillance video, all evidence related to the arrest of Carter Leon. Standard procedure in cases where federal civil rights violations might be at play. Clinton received the request and felt the walls closing in. The hearing room was small but heavy with consequence. 5 people sat on one side of a long table, Internal Affairs Committee members, a union representative, and Clinton William. On the other side sat Henry Corbin, Oliver Zane, and their attorneys. Against the back wall, Alexandra Bridget sat with a laptop and briefcase. Beside her, Enoch Flynn watched with patient intensity. And in the very back row, trying to be invisible, Carter sat with Audrey leaning against his shoulder. The committee chair, a veteran sergeant named Rita Moss, opened the proceedings. "We're here to review the arrest of Carter Leon on March 18th. Officer Corbin, walk us through your actions." Henry sat straight, confident. "We received credible information about a suspect in a hit-and-run case. The suspect matched a description and was located at a supermarket. I approached, identified myself, and made a lawful arrest based on reasonable suspicion." Rita nodded. "And the information you received, what was the source?" "An anonymous tip." "Describe the tip." Henry hesitated slightly. "The caller said there was a man who fit the suspect description, frequented the supermarket, was often with a child." "Did the tip include a vehicle description? A license plate?" "No." "So you arrested a man based on being told he fit the description and shopped at a specific store?" Henry's jaw tightened. "The description matched. I exercised reasonable judgment." Alexandra stood. "May I?" Rita nodded. Alexandra set up her laptop facing the committee. The body cam footage played first. The committee watched Henry approach Carter the way he grabbed and twisted the man's arm without warning, slamming him into the shelf. They heard Audrey scream. They heard Henry's terse reading of rights. They saw Carter trying to explain and Henry dismissing every word. Then came civilian video. The wider angle showed context. A father and daughter shopping. A little girl excited about cereal. Then confusion. Then terror. Finally, Alexandra played the phone call. Henry's voice came through clearly. "I don't care who you are. He matches a suspect description. I'm doing my job." Alexandra's response. "This call is being recorded. If you proceed without probable cause, every second will be part of a federal case." And Henry again. "Do whatever you want. I'm not releasing him." The room went silent. Rita looked at Henry. "You were informed during the arrest that you were potentially detaining a federal witness and that the interaction was being recorded. And you proceeded anyway." Henry's lawyer whispered something, but Henry shook his head. "I believed I had probable cause. I wasn't going to let some lawyer intimidate me." "Probable cause based on what?" Rita's voice hardened. "Let me read you the actual witness statement." She pulled up a document. "Witness says driver was alone, no child present. Vehicle was a dark sedan. Mr. Leon doesn't own a car, was at work at the time, and has multiple witnesses who can confirm his alibi. So explain to me what probable cause you had." Henry had no answer. Rita turned to Oliver. "Officer Zane, you were present. Did you raise concerns?" Oliver looked pale. This was the moment he'd been dreading. He could lie or tell the truth. He chose truth. "Yes, ma'am. I told Officer Corbin that the description seemed too vague, that we should verify more information. He told me to trust him." "And did you?" "I was afraid," Oliver said quietly. "Afraid to push back harder. Afraid that questioning a senior officer would hurt my career. So I stayed silent, even though I knew something was wrong. I was complicit." Rita nodded slowly. "At least you're honest now." She turned back to Henry. "Officer Corbin, your record shows 22 complaints over 5 years. Most were dismissed internally. But this incident, combined with the federal review, paints a concerning picture. You were notified you were interfering with a federal investigation. You proceeded anyway. You used excessive force during an arrest lacking probable cause. You traumatized a child. And you showed complete disregard for oversight." Henry's face was stone. Rita continued. "Rita, the committee's recommendation is immediate termination and referral to the district attorney for potential criminal charges including unlawful detention and violation of civil rights. You are dismissed effective immediately." Henry stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. He left without a word. Rita turned to Oliver. "Officer Zane, you will be suspended without pay for 90 days. You'll undergo mandatory retraining. You'll be on probationary status for 2 years. If you demonstrate genuine reform, you may continue your career. If not, you'll follow Corbin out. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." Oliver's voice was quiet but steady. Finally, Rita addressed Clinton William. Lieutenant, this reveals a systemic problem. A culture where junior officers are afraid to speak up and senior officers believe they're untouchable. You're being temporarily removed from command while we conduct a full review. You'll be reassigned pending outcome. Clinton nodded grimly. Rita stood. This hearing is concluded. Mr. Leon, on behalf of this department, I apologize for what you and your daughter experienced. It should never have happened. 3 days later, the department held a press conference. A formal apology was issued. The chief promised reforms, better training, stronger accountability. The words were careful, designed by lawyers to express remorse without admitting liability. Alexandra filed a civil lawsuit anyway. Not just for money, though Carter deserved compensation, but for change. For a consent decree that would force the department to implement real oversight. Carter sat in Alexandra's office a week later, Audrey coloring quietly nearby. I don't want to drag this out, he said. I don't want Audrey spending years watching me fight in court. I understand, Alexandra replied. But this isn't just about you anymore. There are others like you. People without federal investigators who owe them favors. People without video evidence. They need someone to stand up. Carter looked at his daughter. Audrey had been having nightmares. Every siren made her flinch. I've been running from this fight for 3 years, Carter said slowly, telling myself I just wanted peace. But maybe peace isn't possible while the system is still broken. Maybe the only way to protect her is to make sure this can't happen to other kids. Audrey looked up from her coloring. Dad, are you going to help stop bad policemen? Carter knelt beside her chair. Not just bad police. I'm going to help people understand that good systems create good police, and bad systems create bad ones. We need to fix the system. Will it keep other dads safe? I hope so, Peanut. I really hope so. Audrey considered this, then nodded seriously. Then you should do it. Carter met Alexandra's eyes. Okay, I'm in. What do you need? Welcome back to the fight, Carter. This time you're not alone. Enoch joined them that afternoon. The three sat around Alexandra's conference table mapping strategy. Carter would testify about his old data analysis. He'd explain how the models he built showed systemic patterns. He'd put a human face on the statistics. But more than that, he'd become a consultant. His expertise was exactly what reform efforts needed. He could help build better accountability systems, create dashboards that tracked officer behavior in real time, design early warning systems that flagged problems before they became tragedies. It wouldn't be easy. The police union would fight back. Politicians would resist. But Carter had learned something. Running from the fight didn't make you safe. It just made you lonely. Fighting might not guarantee victory, but at least you weren't alone in the dark. 3 months later, on a Saturday evening, Carter and Audrey walked into the same supermarket, the same fluorescent lights, the same tinny music, but everything felt different. Shoppers recognized Carter now. Some nodded respectfully. A few came up to thank him for speaking out. Bridget, working the register, gave him a genuine smile. Good to see you back, she said. Audrey pushed their cart more confident now. She still flinched at sirens sometimes. Still had nightmares occasionally. But she was healing. They wandered to the cereal aisle. Carter knelt down, examining prices. Audrey stood beside him, not scared this time, just helping. Dad, she asked quietly. Yeah, Peanut. Will they ever do that to us again? Carter looked at his daughter. He could lie, tell her they were completely safe now. But that wasn't how trust worked. I don't know, he said truthfully. But I do know this. If we keep telling the truth, if we keep standing up when things are wrong, we make it harder for bad things to happen. Not impossible, but harder. Audrey processed this with the seriousness only children can bring to big questions. Then she nodded. Then we keep telling the truth. Together. Together, Carter agreed. They finished their shopping, the cart filled with groceries, including the cereal Audrey loved. At the register, Bridget rang them up with quiet efficiency, that same subtle kindness in handling the coupons. As they left, Carter glanced back at the spot where he'd been arrested. For a moment, he could almost see it playing out again. The confusion, the fear, The sound of Audrey screaming. But that moment had passed. It had left scars, yes. But scars meant you survived. And sometimes, if you were lucky and brave and refused to stay silent, scars became stories. And stories became change. Carter took Audrey's hand and walked into the evening. Behind them, the supermarket glowed with its usual fluorescent brightness. Ahead, the street stretched into darkness, punctuated by streetlights. They walked forward together, a small family carrying a big story proof that even in a system designed to silence the powerless, sometimes the powerless find their voice, and sometimes, against all odds, people listen.